of its soldiers were killed in a clash with Chinese forces, raising the original number of casualties at first reported. The hand-to-hand fighting taking place along a disputed border in the Himalayas. China has accused India of a provocation and has not disclosed if any of its troops were killed. Tensions between the two sides have been building over the last month, but this is the first incident with fatalities in more than 4 decades.
For weeks, trouble has been brewing in one of the remotest border regions in the world. These satellite images show Indian and Chinese troops gathering high in the Himalayas. Now, for the first time in decades, India says 20 soldiers were killed. The two sides fought with fists and rocks. No shots were fired. Among those left bereft, the family of Colonel Santosh Babu, who was killed. We were shocked. Since yesterday, we have been in a deep shock on hearing about my son's misfortune. We never expected this, but it is not new for him to be working in such difficult places. Angry protesters gathered in the city of Ahmedabad, demanding revenge and calling for a boycott of Chinese goods. Let's make India self-reliant and give China a fitting reply. Beijing says it was defending its territorial integrity. Shockingly, on June 15th, Indian troops seriously violated the bilateral consensus and crossed the borderline twice, engaging in illegal activities and provoking and attacking Chinese personnel, resulting in serious physical confrontation between border forces on the two sides. This yellow line marks the boundary between these superpowers. Known as the line of actual control, it is not a hard frontier since China and India have never agreed on where it should lie. In 2017, the two sides confronted each other for 73 days after Indian troops blocked Chinese construction of a road. For years, Chinese and Indian leaders have struggled to reach a lasting solution. This latest escalation suggests a difficult path ahead for these two nuclear-armed nations.
He's chair professor at the Soochow University in Suzhou, and he was also interpreter for Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping and has a deep understanding of the Communist Party. Victor Gao, welcome. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has said Indian forces, quote, provoked and attacked Chinese personnel in the Galwan Valley in Ladakh, where this violent incident happened. So this is all India's fault, is it?
Well, first of all, it is very unfortunate for China and India to have this confrontation along the very long, very arduous border. Secondly, the fact that deaths occurred on both sides was extremely unfortunate. And third point is that fortunately no guns have been fired between the troops of the two countries. And from the Chinese perspective, of top priority is to calm down and to de-escalate. And neither China nor India want to have a war between the two largest populations in the world. A war will be detrimental to both countries. And I think the top priority is to negotiate a peaceful settlement of the border conflict between the two countries.
There's lots to unpack here, but you said, you talked about deaths on both sides. China hasn't confirmed any reports of deaths on its side. What do you know?
Well, the fact that this did not involve any gunshots between the troops of the two countries is very significant. And I understand ever since the end of the Indian-China border clash in 1962, no gunfires had happened along the long border. And this time was no exception. This means that the two countries have been maximum restrained, even when they come to blows with each other. And when you talk about bodily conflicts involving able-bodied soldiers, it is highly unusual that you will have injuries or even deaths on one side with nothing happening on the other side. However,
so there have been deaths on the Chinese side?
Not published. Well, I think the media reports indicate there have been deaths on both sides, but there has been no government official report on the Chinese side. But I would say any death on either side or on both sides is very, very unfortunate. And I personally would mourn the death of any soldier or officer killed in the brawl.
Right.
And I hope neither side will happen with this bodily injury against each other again.
Victor Gao, you spoke of a long and arduous border, but it's also a disputed border. Why then did Chinese troops enter the Galwan Valley, where this particular clash occurred, unilaterally in early May?
Well, you may know before the British occupied the Indian subcontinent, India was a cluster of different states. And when the British Indian Empire was at the peak, it kept encroaching into China's Tibetan region. And this actually caused a lot of border disputes after the British left, especially because the British carved out this so-called Mackay-Hong line, which successive Chinese governments have never recognized. And as of today, it is true that there are border disputes between China and India wanted to use the British line of demarcation between China and India, and China throughout the ages or through several successive Chinese governments have never recognized the legality of the Mackay-Hong line. So I think it's up to China and India to use all their wisdom and foresight to come to a settlement of their land disputes between the two countries.
But that settlement hasn't been arrived at, is what I'm saying, Victor Gao. And therefore, it is a matter for bilateral discussion, something that you alluded to in your first answer. Therefore, my question is, why did Chinese troops, where they were last in 1962?
No, I don't think what you mentioned is accurate on the situation on the ground. China has been maintaining its part of the deal with the Indian side, and China from the very beginning has been urging no conflict, no bodily injury would happen, and China has been calling for maximum restraint. And the fact that China and India have never fired a single shot against each other ever since the end of the China-Indian border war in 1962.
That is incorrect. There were shots fired in 1967 and 1975. But aside from that, you keep talking about no shots being fired. That is because of confidence-building measures, CBMs, that exist between the Chinese army and the Indian army. And they lay out quite clearly that no firearms are to be used in these engagements. That is the reason why no shots have been fired, is it not?
Yes, indeed. That actually means that both China and India can exercise maximum restraint in situations like this. And I hope this will continue to be the case. And both sides need to de-escalate and avoid further building up the tension.
You speak about de-escalation. There is a lot of anger and shock in India. What is the message from China to India today?
Well, I think the message is undoubtedly a message of peace, because both China and India want to develop. Both countries want to really avoid any kind of mid-income trap, which have befallen on many emerging markets in the world in recent decades. And China and India, being the two largest populations in the world, can only get along with each other rather than fall into a trap of traditional hostility, eventually even engulfing themselves with the great tragedy of war. For example, China and India had a war. It was very bitter, and it did not leave a very good legacy for quite a few decades.
Speaking of that legacy,
any flaring up of conflict will be bad for the two nations.
Speaking of that legacy and this deadliest clash in more than 40 years, do you think China-India ties can actually recover?
Absolutely. I'm very, very confident about the future of relations between China and India. Why? Because these two are the largest populations in the world. China with 1.4 billion, India with 1.3 billion. For these two countries not to get along and to engage in war against each other will be calamities for both China and India, as well as for world peace. Therefore, anyone with decency of mind will need to promote peace and stability and harmony between China and India. There is no other way for these two great countries to move forward.
Victor Gao, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Joining us now with the latest is DW's Nimisha Jaiswal coming in from Delhi. Good day to you, Nimisha. Can you give us some more details about what happened?
Well, Brian, over the last 24 hours, more details have been emerging from both the military as well as the political establishments in both countries. The Indian military, as we heard, has confirmed that there have been 20 deaths. On the Chinese side, the defense ministry has confirmed that there have been casualties, but not confirmed the number of casualties. This morning, finally, we heard from the political establishment in India as well, something that the media had repeatedly been pointing out here, that there had been a lack of so far. The defense minister put out a tweet offering condolences to the families of the soldiers who lost their lives on the border with China. Now, of course, the tone of this tweet does not indicate any call for retribution, which has been seen by analysts and the media here as an effort to not escalate the situation further. Even when India said that 20 soldiers had been killed, they said both sides are disengaging right now. The Prime Minister of India has also called an all-party meet later this evening.
Now, these casualties came in hand-to-hand combat. This is the most serious confrontation. We've been reporting on in 4 decades. What's Delhi saying about who started the violence and how it started?
Well, Brian, there are contrary versions coming out from both sides, and the roots of this is truly the controversial and the contradicted nature of the line of actual control in the Ladakh region between these two countries. Now, this is a de facto border, and there have been disagreements in the past as well about what exactly lies in the terrain of both these countries. And the context of this conflict is that there have, over the last 6 weeks, over the last 2 weeks, the military has, of course, the military of both sides have said that we want to settle this through dialogue rather than conflict. India says that China was trying to change the status quo. This was a statement that was put out, retaliated. China, on the other hand, says that Indian soldiers went into Chinese territory. India reiterates that Indian soldiers never go into Chinese territory. So clearly a difference of opinion on what actually is the territory that belongs to India and China. India alleges and believes that this may be an effort by China to carry out land grabs.
Okay, all of this makes it very difficult for that dialogue you mentioned to happen between the two countries. What's been the public response in India to the loss of military lives?
Well, Brian, what's interesting in India is that the warmongering, almost jingoistic response we see amongst the public when it comes to conflict with Pakistan is largely missing when it comes to conflict with China. Over the last 6 weeks, there has been a call to hit China where it really hurts, which is the economic front. So Indians were uninstalling TikTok. This app became very popular called Uninstall Chinese Apps. And this is the focus of a lot of celebrity talk as well, asking India to cut off trade ties with China. However, the loss of life has definitely ramped up more serious military sentiment as well. There has been a call for retribution. Small protests have broken out from fringe groups in different parts of the country. But of course, there is an effort also, it seems, on the top level to de-escalate the situation. And we're going to have to wait to see through the day today how exactly this proceeds.
Okay, we'll know more about that as that proceeds. Nimisha, for now,